Memory requires interpretation. Moses retells the story of the spies from the Book of Devarim. One of the things that makes the Book of Devarim so fascinating is that Moses spends much of his final speech telling Israel stories they already know. The people standing before Moses have lived through these events. They know about the Exodus, they know about Sinai, they know about the wilderness journey. In fact, they are still part of the wilderness journey. So one of the central questions of Devarim is, why does Moses tell these stories again? The answer is that Devarim teaches us that memory is not simply about preserving information. Memory requires interpretation. Moses is not just asking Israel to remember what happened. He is teaching them to understand why it happened and what it means for their future. I want to look at one example of this through the story of the spies. The story appears first in the book of Numbers. In chapters 13 and 14, Moses sends 12 spies to explore the land of Canaan. They return and report that the land is good, but they were afraid of the people living there. Well, Caleb responds, "Let us by all means go up, and we shall gather possession of it, for we shall surely overcome it." However, the other spies responded, "We cannot attack the people, for it is stronger than we." The people hear this report. It spreads. Fear spreads. And they absolutely refuse to enter the land. When we read this story in Numbers, the emphasis is on the event itself, the spies, the fear, the rebellion, and the consequence that the generation will not enter the land and wandered again for many more years until they've come to this point. But then, 40 years later, Moses tells this story again in Deuteronomy. And what is interesting is that Moses tells it differently. In Deuteronomy chapter 1, Moses said, "You refused to go up, and you flouted the command of the Lord your God. You grumbled in your tents, and you said, 'Because the Lord hates us.' They said the Lord hated them. He brought us out of the land of Egypt to hand us over to the Amorites to destroy us." Wow. Moses adds something that's not emphasized in the same way in Numbers. He highlights Israel's interpretation of their own story. The people didn't say, "This land is not difficult, God, we can't do it." They said God brought us out of Egypt because he hated us. This issue is no longer about fear. This issue is how Israel understands its relationship with God. This is one of the important literary features of Devarim, repetition with variation. The Torah repeats stories, but it does not simply copy them. The differences matter. They invite us to ask why Moses chooses to emphasize certain details when he retells the story. Numbers asks, "What happened?" Deuteronomy asks, "What did we learn from what happened?" This is a different kind of history. It's not simply a record of events. It's a theological interpretation of these events. This is especially important because Moses is speaking to a new generation. The people standing before him are not the same people who left Egypt. They are the children of the wilderness generation. Yes, they know the wilderness. They inherited the consequences of the past, but they have the new responsibility of moving forward. Moses is teaching them that the past is not something they inherit. It isn't something they must interpret and something they must learn from. This connects to one of the major themes of Devarim, and that is memory. Throughout the book, Moses repeatedly uses language of remembering and forgetting. Remember, do not forget, teach your children. The Hebrew word zakor, remember, appears again and again because memory is not passive in Judaism. Remembering is an act of responsibility. The question is not simply, do you know what happened? The question is, how does what happened shape who you become? Sforno, commenting on Deuteronomy 1:1, explains that Moses reviews Israel's failures so that the new generation can learn from them. The purpose of retelling the past is not to preserve a historical record. The purpose is moral formation. In other words, Moses is not looking backward because he is stuck in the past. He is looking backwards because the past determines how Israel will move into the future. This idea is especially important as we think about leadership and community. Every generation receives stories from the generations before it, but receiving a story is not enough. Every generation must decide how to understand that story and how to live it. Devarim teaches that faithful memory requires both honesty and responsibility. Israel must remember its failures, not remain trapped by them, but to learn from them. Moses' final speech is therefore not simply a history lesson, it is an act of preparation. He is preparing Israel to enter the land without him. He's preparing them to become a covenant community that can carry Torah forward after their greatest leader is gone. The lesson of the spies is not only about a failure that happened 40 years early, it is about every generation's challenge. How do we tell our stories? How do we understand our past? And how do we allow memory to become the foundation for a faithful future? That is the work that Moses begins in Devarim. Thank you.